I think we have a lot of our customers join us. We have a lot of our partners join us. You probably are already very familiar with us, but for those of you who are new to NetElixir, we help retail brands find and engage high-value customers. That's what we do as a company. We offer a wide range of solutions in digital marketing, starting from paid search engine optimization, social media, marketing, Amazon marketing services, analytics consulting, and website development or e-commerce tech development. We are proud partners of UPS. We are a Google Premier partner. We are a Bing or a Microsoft Premier partner as well, and a Facebook Premier partner also. And we work with a wide range of clients, many of who are sort of joining today. Many of you have asked as to why did we start a series with leading thinkers and professors like George, and this was the answer that I have for all of you. We are all in unprecedented times. I mean, things have been very uncertain and unpredictable, and we wanted to at this point in time really act as a connector, bringing together some of the most well-known thinkers around the world to share their ideas to companies, which really helps them to navigate through these difficult times. So I think that's where I think we are a very data-driven company, and we felt that in this situation, which is as big as this, we really needed more than just real data. We need knowledge which inspires us to look towards the future. And in George's presentation, you'll sort of hear a lot of his thoughts, thought leadership that really sparks fresh ideas, a broader worldview, something which is very important because it's very easy to get little myopic and just constantly look into the tunnel, and lots of really genius to help us connect the dots and move forward effortlessly. I mean, this webinar series, which is called Reimagine Tomorrow, aims to get us thinking about tomorrow, which through innovative, again, thought leaders sharing experiences, insights, and research. And once you begin to believe that we will get through this, we will have an improved tomorrow when we do. So that's, I think, the entire purpose of the Reimagine Tomorrow series. And I am privileged to introduce to all of you Professor George Day, professor at the Wharton School at UPenn. Professor George Day, I mean, I had a difficulty in terms of fitting his resume or bio in one page, one slide, but I just sort of picked my 3 favorites. So George, with your permission, I mean, the first one, which again, I mean, in 2015, George was chosen as one of the 11 legends in marketing. In 2017, he was awarded the William Wilkie Marketing for the World Award. He has authored 18 books in the area of marketing and strategic management. And 2 of his published articles were really among the top 25 most influential articles in marketing science in the past 25 years. It's really a matter of privilege to really welcome George at our event today, or at our conference event. Before I hand it over to George, and George will be sort of sharing his screen, I also wanted to take this opportunity to announce an exciting event that we are hosting next month on the 13th of August. It's called Connecting the Dots, and it's a virtual conference which is really focused on the holiday readiness for retailers. It's on August 13th, 11:30 a.m. to 5:15 p.m. And we have a stellar group of speakers and presenters, thought leaders joining us. Please feel free to register using this URL, netelixir.com/holiday summit. A couple of fun anecdotes about the speaker part. We have a lady, Sheena Iyengar, who's continuing with her Reimagine Tomorrow series. So those of you who had participated in X Equals Experience events, Sheena she's a professor of Columbia Business School. She has spoken a couple of times at the X Equals Experience. We have an FBI agent who's joining us at the event next month, Robin Dreek. He was the director of behavioral analysis at FBI. And the third fun trivia, other than that, you must be thinking as to where is the retail part. So we have a head of Google SMB segment, Bob Dylan, joining us. We have Kellyanne, who is the head of SMB segment for Microsoft. We have Carlo, who heads North America. Lenovo, we have Al Bassin from Circa Lighting, the chief operating officer. We have Parag Shah, who has been a guest on this series earlier. He is the head of grocery for Wakefern. We, of course, have Matthew Guffey, who is the president of strategy for UPS. We have Milton. It's a fairly wide range, but very interestingly, and this is again a fun anecdote, we actually have a famous magician joining us from the United Kingdom. So that's going to be a different attempt in terms of adding a little bit of magic, because NetElixir, as you know, it's all about elixir. So we are really getting a first magician on our show as well. It's free. Attendance here is free, but we would definitely appreciate your contribution. We run a non-profit foundation which supports the education, the high school and college education of underprivileged girls in India, and any contribution there would sort of help their education and help us to sponsor more girls and really support their education. So those of you who are interested can definitely use this URL udan-trust.org and make your contributions there. But I really wanted to, on behalf of my entire team at NetElixir, welcome all of you to this event. Before I hand it over to George, I also have another request. And my request would be, you will sort of hear a lot of information, a lot of ideas. Please, obviously, feel free to ping your questions on the chat box or the question bar. And we would really appreciate if you can fill in a short survey. We would love to share the survey feedback with George, since he has been so kind to really spend time with us and sharing ideas. With that, let me, without further ado, really hand it over to George Day from the Wharton School in UPenn. George, I'll sort of stop sharing and I'll sort of hand over the share to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I need to find my slides first. Heather, can you get my slides up for me, please?
Oh, I can sort of, do you want me to pull up, George? I can sort of pull up the slides as well.
Yeah.
So you probably, if you stop sharing, I can just pull up the slides as well. Sure. Perfect. You should be able to see it now, George.
There we are. Well, Udayan, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thinking with your network and all the people that are interested in reimagining tomorrow. I just love that concept. But my answer will be that you reimagine tomorrow by seeing it sooner than anyone else. So let me tell you where we're going to go in the next half hour or so. And we're going to build upon the material that is in a book that came out last November. And it focused primarily on digital turbulence. But it turns out that the concept of seeing sooner and then acting faster is applicable to all kinds of turbulence. Just that our publisher was insistent upon getting digital into the title somehow or another. And it turns out that in the future, as we can envision it or reimagine it, digital will have a central place. But it'll interact with a lot of other forces. So what I'm going to share with you is what we've learned about organizations that are better at seeing sooner, that is in reimagining the future to their advantage, and then acting faster on that knowledge, as opposed to the more vulnerable ones, particularly in the retail space, that were slow to build the capabilities. They lacked resilience, probably had too much debt, and have fewer degrees of freedom. So what is it that an organization does to become resilient in a turbulent environment? And I certainly want to start off always with Peter Drucker, who's been an enormously influential force in my thinking. But he observed that turbulence is something that can be managed. It may look erratic and nonlinear, but there are ways of managing it. And let's work through what we know about how to manage it. And I'm going to particularly talk about this notion of a vigilant organization and vigilant leadership, one where curiosity, candor, and foresight are primary in the organization. And then, as I mentioned, these vigilant organizations that are able to see sooner have a lot more degrees of freedom. And by that I mean they've already done the preliminary analyses. They've done the market probes. They've done a number of experiments to see what's going to happen and test their models. So when the time is right, they can jump in and act much faster. Then we have the next element is that, of course, what we're finding, and the reason why the concept is so applicable now, is that vigilant organizations are much better prepared when the uncertainty subsides, because they are already looking out over the horizon. It's in their nature, their DNA, to look ahead and look over the horizon and try to anticipate what's coming further. And I'm going to give you and share some tools for actually doing that. So here's our agenda. The two principal topics I'm going to focus on are what have we learned, and particularly I'm going to focus on how you might improve your own organizational vigilance, that is, its capability to see sooner and act faster. So let me give you a couple of examples, and just to set the stage for why this is so deceptively difficult, but enormously effective. And let me start with the top left on an example of that I think captures the concept of vigilance and is truly a vigilant organization. Adobe, back about 12 years ago, no, 14 years ago, was looking at their packaged software products, particularly their editing products that were all shrink-wrapped software. And you purchased it as a graphic artist, and it was yours. But as Adobe looked over the horizon, they could see what we're already seeing now, very forcefully, is the power of the cloud and cloud computing. And they made the decision to move all of their products onto the cloud and move to a subscription service. Well, that was not well regarded, well received by most of their clients initially. And then they discovered, hey, it was cheaper, faster upgrades, and better performance. Right now, Adobe is riding an enormous surge of demand for the basic Acrobat product. And most important, which is less obvious, they've also seen off, that is, deterred major competitors from getting into their space because they were in the lead, they saw sooner, and they preempted the major positions. I'll just give you one other example on this page. I've got tons of them, but Sonoma County wine growers became the, about 8 or 9 years ago, made a commitment as they looked over the horizon and saw how climate change was going to impact the world's second largest wine growing region. They said, we will commit. This is now 7 years ago, after they've absorbed the threat of climate change. They said, we're going to be the first 99% certified sustainable wine region. And they got there last year. Huge advantage. But let's turn and look at the other side of the coin. When you're vulnerable, here's some of the things that happen. You're all familiar with the Wells Fargo sales scam, where the employees were opening up sham accounts and not telling the customers. They opened up hundreds of thousands of them because their incentive system drove them to do that. Now, there were abundant warnings within the organization and from outside, but the leadership was oblivious, and one could argue they were exercising willful blindness. I picked up one that I thought was interesting out of the retail space. It's a now disappeared fast fashion retailer, Forever 21, targeting millennials and younger. And they were expanding at an enormously rapid rate 2 years ago. And they totally missed the signal that particularly the younger customers, were very concerned about climate change and not drawn to their existing offerings because they were making sustainability much more of a buying criterion. Now, they should have seen that. Had they seen it, two things would have happened. They wouldn't have continued expanding at a breakneck speed, and they would have repositioned their offerings. Instead, by seeing too late and responding too slowly, they are now bankrupt. This was pre the pandemic. So let's turn to what we've learned, and I want to summarize everything around this marvelous quote by Jack Welch. He emphasizes the necessity for leadership and leaders to develop the sixth sense, an ability to see around the corner. And what we've learned through studying now in depth with many clients, probably 15 long-term engagements with these companies, and surveys of about 480 different organizations, ranging from international companies to big foundations. And the common theme is that it's a leadership story. And I'm going to start with the third bullet, because that is what really I think is at the core of what we've found. And that vigilant organizations invariably have leadership teams that are deeply curious, and that turns out to be critical, open, and they stand on the outside looking in at their organization. They are particularly good at taking the perspective of their customers, standing in their shoes, something that is ingrained in marketers, but in many leaders, it's an unnatural act. We're much more likely to look at the environment, the market opportunities from the inside out and say, well, we have these capabilities. How can we use them? How can we sell more, gain more market share? Important questions, but the outside in perspective is one that it really sets you out to look at your company objectively and ask, why would a customer choose us given the other alternatives? A few other things we've learned. I'm going to go to the second bullet now. uh, this was a theme in every one of the clinical studies we did. And firms are constantly being surprised. But what we found is that when we dug into a surprise, someone knew about it in the network or in the organization. And so what happened? Well, leadership didn't know they knew about this competitive move or shift in buying behavior. Uh, so leadership didn't know what they knew, and they just assumed that leadership would know, but they didn't know that they needed to know. And that simple and somewhat paradoxical observation suggests that a lot of it has to do with information flow and sharing of weak signals and then deeply understanding them. So the focus has to be on the leadership team building the capabilities to and particularly investing in foresight. And I'll say more about how organizations effectively invest in foresight to make them more vigilant. Finally, going back to the top, the big problem is that the attention of the leadership team is a very scarce resource. And in vulnerable organizations, it's usually soaked up by immediate issues or over the next 6 months. What we have learned, though, is that vigilant organizations allocate as much as 50% of their time thinking about the future. So let's put those together and talk about how we might change an organization. What's a change process that you would want to go through in order to improve your ability to navigate the tremendous uncertainty that's going to be coming ahead as we move out of the pandemic, whenever that may be, which is, again, a highly uncertain timing. We don't know whether there's going to be a stop-go. And all these things make it very difficult to manage. But vigilant organizations would be better prepared. So step one in becoming more vigilant is show in many, many ways, and I'll talk about that you're deeply committed to vigilance and that you're open to weak signals coming in from everywhere in your organization, as well as through your network partners and outside. Second step is invest in foresight. Then you change how you go about making strategy. That's this notion of making strategy from the outside in, starting from the outside in. Then finally, aligning the organization is about making sure there's good coordination, information flows, and that in particular, there's someone is accountable for collecting the paranoia, if you like, and sharing it with the leadership team. So let's go to the next stage and remind everybody why leadership is important. Again, I'll invoke Peter Drucker, who said only three things happen naturally: friction, confusion, and underperformance. That pretty much sums up a rudderless organization. Everything else that happens requires leadership. So what would this look like? Let's talk about the next step then of how we demonstrate leadership commitment. And I'm going to start off with a somewhat, you may find this highly amusing, and it is, but also highly relevant to leadership. And it's by a famous science fiction writer who summed up what he'd learned about science. He was a scientist himself, and he said, the most exciting phrase in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, and he looked across a lot of them, it's not eureka, but that's funny. And what he was talking about, this is really anomalous. This doesn't fit the theory. I need to go and explain it. So let me use that to set the stage for how you go about as a leadership team. And I'm focusing largely on the team here, if you like, the C-suite, but it has to pervade the whole organization. But the C-suite has to spend more time thinking about the future and spending less time with the board of directors, for example, instead of directors' meetings being all about performance reviews, capital appropriation requests, and so forth. You engage the board of directors in thinking about possible futures, scenarios. You'll really cultivate curiosity. And this is where the dissection of anomalies is so important. There's a interesting and illustrative story about Alan Mulally, who was literally the CEO of Boeing way back, this is like 15 years ago, became the CEO of Ford. And I think his approach was extremely instructive. He literally took an organization that was hidebound, highly siloed, and got them to think about the future and think much more imaginatively. And he did one thing, and he changed the character of their Monday morning meetings, the kind of 8 to 10, let's catch up and look ahead kind of meeting with the whole leadership team around the world. Every major part, trucks, cars, every platform. And these were normally meetings where pre-digested PowerPoints were shared, but they'd already been vetted, and the emphasis was on making sure we take out anything that's controversial. So these were highly predictable meetings before Mulally came on board. Halfway through his first Monday morning meeting, he said, I don't want to see any more PowerPoints. I mean, without any warning. So you can imagine sitting around a big boardroom table with 18 very senior and egocentric leaders, and they'd already invested an enormous amount of time in these PowerPoints, didn't want to see them. Instead, I want to talk about what anomalies you've seen in the last couple of weeks. Well, much head scratching. Finally, one head of a major product platform said, there was this very strange going an event in a dealer. And so we're trying to still understand this. And Mulally really celebrated that. And he said, I want to spend the first 15 minutes of every meeting dissecting anomalies, trying to understand why this happened. And an anomaly could be a strange response from a supplier who maybe had supply chain problems. Well, why did they have supply chain problems? What can we do about it? So I'm using this as an illustration of how a vigilant leadership team can really change the nature of the conversation. They can also expand into different knowledge networks. For example, there is the True North group that is at Harvard, and that takes you into different and uncomfortable spaces. Or you could join an AI consortium and figure out what the possibilities are. Lastly, and where we start our engagements with our clients is by trying to understand their vigilance quotient. So let me explain it with the next slide. And it's the vigilant quotient is really measuring where your organization is on this spectrum from low vigilance to high vigilance. And I want to emphasize this is a spectrum. Most organizations are clustered in the middle or on the left, according to our data. And the definition of where you are, and we have an instrument we can share with you, is that it firstly measures the leadership posture. That is this notion of commitment. What we find is that vigilant leadership teams, again, to reinforce what I said earlier, really are into diverse networks, diverse inputs, but they play the long game as opposed to, and I'm putting on the left-hand side, the vulnerable organizations, a bit of a stereotype. There are very few that are as myopic, but you'll recognize perhaps organizations that have this kind of vulnerable approach to leadership. Secondly, how they make strategy. And the key thing, particularly now, is whether the strategy making approaches are outside in or inside out, but especially now, whether they embrace uncertainty as an opportunity. So vigilant organizations much more likely to drive their strategy process through a scenario, a set of scenarios, because the one thing we will have to watch out for is the deceptive certainty of some forecasts. What we're going to be seeing in the next year is an enormous amount of uncertainty and unpredictability. And you've got to have a very adaptive process. I'll talk more about how we approach Foresight, and but one of the things that our data shows, perhaps surprisingly, is that one of the biggest discriminators between a vigilant and a vulnerable organization is their approach to innovation disappointments. So you launch a new product or a new service, a new business model, and if there is a failure, a disappointment, which is my preferred term, in a vulnerable organization, that's seen as an error. Whereas in vigilant organizations, they say, well, we did our best. As 3M said, we'd had a well-intentioned mistake or error, and but we can learn from it. And by the way, most organizations that adopt that posture find what happened, and then they build a new product or a new service on that insight. And then finally, there is much more coordination and information sharing, especially in vigilant organizations. So let's move on to how we might apply that into the issue of foresight into the next year or so. Here, I'm going to share with you in a somewhat disguised fashion how we're approaching a number of our clients. And the question is, what kinds of questions should we be asking? So what zones of uncertainty should we watch? And I'll show you what a zone of uncertainty map looks like. But what we're aiming to get at is have them think through, what are the biggest uncertainties? Is this a major inflection point that's going to reshape the industry? What kinds of moves can we make, particularly now in the fallout from the pandemic? We're looking at opportunistic moves, not only finding perhaps talent that we'd have not been able to get previously, that perhaps is being let go or sees trouble on the horizon, but there's also plenty of takeovers. Who can we acquire that might build our capability for the future? And then what kinds of new talent and capabilities are needed? These are questions that I think you have to be asking now, even though you're struggling mightily to deal with the here and now of adjusting to the chaos. So let me talk a little bit about how we might structure this with this map of uncertainty zones. This is illustrative. This is a mashup of a number of clients, but we see the zones are principally in three areas: digital, front and center, and the other surrounding zones of uncertainty. And uncertainty means that we can't even put a forecast on it. There's no way to assign probability. But for example, just under disruptive events, we're going to have to deal with cyber attacks. And those are not going to go away. In fact, they may intensify. Tremendous impact on marketing practices. The kind of integrated customer experience mapping that NetElixir does will be enormously helpful in thinking through how data analytics and social media will reshape practices. There'll be a pushback on globalization with entirely unpredictable results. And when I say unpredictable, I'm meaning fundamentally really uncertain. But the important thing is not the zones, it's the connections between the zones. And that's the, so you can spend several hours on a map like this by conjecturing and considering what zones of the environment we have to look back. For example, by considering the possible pushback on globalization and how that's going to impact on supply chains. Many companies are already discovering their supply chains are far too resilient, but will that mean, for example, that we're going to do much more fabrication at the point of sale, which would dramatically change the nature of many companies' supply chains? Well, it turns out computerized fabrication has moved dramatically forward. So that's the basic idea of capturing the zones of uncertainty and using that as a departure point for a dialogue about what's going to happen when we emerge. So let me just wrap up here because I'm really anxious to get your questions and talk about the last three elements of a change process. This will come as no surprise that the second major move in building a more vigilant organization is to invest in foresight. And one of the principal, literally progenitors of this notion of vigilance was Andy Grove. And he wrote this wonderful book, Only the Paranoid Survive. Because what he observed in Intel, which he was the founder of, is that when spring comes, snow melts first at the periphery, because that's where it's most exposed. And the point was, you've got to have outposts continuously communicating weak signals of threats and opportunities back to the leadership team. So this would be under the dynamic sensing capability and sharing of information. We also find that vigilant organizations really invest a great deal in searching for opportunities. They don't wait for them to come. They look for the weak signals of opportunities, and then they go out and study and invest in studying, for example, precursors. They learn a great deal from their defectors and their complainers. They also are leaders in digital transformation. A couple of other things we see is that they're highly networked, and they have built foresight teams. This gets into the last two of the change drivers that we find. Let's go to the next one, which is changing how strategy is made. So we find that, and I'll start with Stephen Blank's observation, there are no answers inside the building, you got to get out. And that's the outside in approach. But I could spend a lot of time on this, because your conclusion may be now, there's so many things happening out there that we can't possibly watch everything. Absolutely correct. You've got to focus that scarce attention resort and build questions that learn from the past. For example, one of our major exercises with a client will be, let's look back at the big misses where you didn't see an opportunity or a threat in time and suffered. And then let's look at the hits where you did see in time and were able to get an advantage. List them all and then dissect the reasons why we had hits and or misses. And you can really engage a leadership team through that kind of dialogue and dissection of what it is that's common, if you like, about all of the misses we've made. The inability to see a trend, the inability to capture a technology ahead of competitors. We can learn a lot from the present, and anticipating the future is principally about creating alternative scenarios, because we find that scenario thinking, alternative plausible futures, is the best way to unlock the mind from the existing reality and consider alternative plausible futures. So the last step is, and the fourth in the change agenda. So let's turn to that one. And if I could get the alignment one, it's this is the notion of aligning, creating accountability, and making sure that someone is accountable for, and that's why we advocate having a small Foresight team, part-time maybe, don't have to invest a lot, but someone has to collect the weak signals, try to make sense of them. So the organizational alignment is often a prelude to creating a more resilient and really anticipatory organization. So you got to be open to uncomfortable news. In fact, you got to encourage it. You want to make sure your people on the outskirts, in your regional offices, in the other countries, suppliers, partners, are not sugarcoating the news. Then finally, information sharing is critical, and you will do this best with small teams. And I can pick up on that during the question and answer session. So, Udayan, let's open it up for questions, and sure. I will remind everyone. I'll take you back to the Galapagos in the 1860s and remind you that Charles Darwin concluded it's not the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptive, i.e., the most responsive to change. That is, in my terminology, the most vigilant organizations. So I'm anxious to hear what questions this raises, and
absolutely.
This is
we have a bunch of
Vigilance Quotient. So a sampling of the kinds of questions we use to try to diagnose an organization.
Absolutely. So George, we have a bunch of questions. The first question would be, how situational is vigilance? Is vigilance dependent on this current situation, and how it evolves, the level of vigilance, should it change, and should it remain the same?
So it's highly situational. What I've shared with you are kind of high level, if you like, navigation principles that you have that we find are true of all vigilant organizations. But how you manifest them is very much a function of where you see problems or opportunities in your vigilance survey, the kind of market you're in. For example, vigilance is not nearly as much of a premium in organizations that are highly regulated, fairly stable, but there are very few of those now. Whereas if you're in a turbulent industry with cross-cutting digital transformations happening, with a lot of competition, the way you approach it and the amount of time you invest in thinking about the future will be much, much higher. So it is situational. It has to be tailored to the realities. But what I've shared with you are principles that pretty much cut across all sectors. And we've done this with literally over 120 global international companies, as well as foundations of all sizes and shape. How they go about exercising vigilance has to be tailored to where they are, and that's the vigilance survey, because that'll tell you where you have to fix things. Because a lot of the questions, as you'll see, are framed against competition, because you can be pretty vigilant, but if the competitors are even more vigilant and more farsighted and investing more in vigilance, you're going to fall behind. So the competitive realities really will shape how intensely you invest in this and how you go about doing it.
Fabulous. George, I have
Great
a bunch
question.
of questions coming in. So let me jump into the next one. How effective is data science while you are creating the outside-in strategy?
So outside-in thinking is very much, if you like, another expansion of the concept of market orientation, which says we're going to be customer-centric. That is, focus our organization on meeting, satisfying, and excelling in satisfying the customer's needs. Outside-in thinking takes that and adds two components that are particularly critical, but it's, as I mentioned earlier, standing outside the organization and then exercising a high level of curiosity. So outside-in thinking is really about both curiosity and empathy. That is, by standing in the shoes of your customers, or interestingly, your competitors, because outside-in organizations do a lot of what the military calls red teaming. So if you want to get an organization to stand back and look at it objectively, have the leaders role play the same roles in their principal competitors or several competitors. And by role playing, and let me give you an example out of the chemicals market. There is one company that convenes a group of its C-suite leaders every other Friday for a couple of hours, and they receive all the intelligence on all the moves by their principal competitor that they can pull together in the last couple of weeks. These people role play their counterparts, the CEO, CFO, Chief Development Officer, and so forth. They know these people. They may have met them because they're implacable competitors. They will know a lot about their background, and they're really well prepared to look at the world through their eyes. And in fact, having been on some of these meetings, it's fascinating to see how they switch roles. And so now they're role playing and absorbed in all the latest intelligence about the organization, what moves they've made, what patents they filed, and so forth, acquisitions and so forth. And then the operating managers come in with, well, we're thinking about a shift in our pricing structure for this particular product. How will competitor X respond? And so by role playing, they can put themselves into the shoes of the competitor, looking at the action taken by the focal company and try to anticipate how they would respond. So that's, if you like, an extended discussion of what I mean by outside-in thinking, as contrasted with, okay, let's look at what resources we got. How else could we use them more effectively? What are the labs finding? And what are our salespeople saying we should be doing with prices?
Fabulous. Thank you, George. I have a couple of more questions. Your thoughts on a company's existing core competencies and the emerging opportunities outside the company's core. Any thoughts there on companies' existing core competencies and emerging opportunities which are outside the core?
Yeah, so I'll particularly focus on this set of dynamic capabilities So let me explain a little bit about the background on this big field of study called dynamic capabilities theory. But it says that all organizations that excel at efficient operations have ordinary capabilities. That is, processes they manage for lowest cost efficiency. Think of supply chains that are optimized for lowest cost and minimal inventories. Now, that's an ordinary capability to achieve that. A dynamic capability is a set of sub-capabilities around sensing opportunities and threats sooner. So you can see why sensing capabilities are so critical in vigilance. Seizing faster, and it's literally reconfiguring your existing capabilities faster to capture a new opportunity. And then the third part of dynamic capabilities is transforming, quickly building new kinds of organizations. And vigilance is very much in the spirit of that.
Yeah. Thank you, George. Let me move on to the penultimate question. I know we are sort of running a little out of time, but I have two more questions to ask. So Fred asks, what kind of questions can you ask to find the person that knows about a significant risk to the status quo, but does not have the strength or the courage to share?
Yeah, so I think we're getting into how do you identify the people that think laterally, the mavericks, and I would argue we need to celebrate people who think differently and seek them out and make them and their opinions and information and insights welcome. And that's the nature of one of the elements of curiosity. So what are my people thinking out in the regional offices? You got to get out there and find out, well, or do a Zoom meeting. But you want to make people feel as though their insights, information, and early warnings are not only welcome, but crucial. And that leads to the celebration. So Andy Grove was particularly good at celebrating a weak signal that turned out to be either a latent opportunity or an early warning by a competitor of a competitor's move. And he would, in his leadership meetings and later in big management meetings, identify the person and celebrate their insight, and obviously making it and endorsing that kind of behavior. So it's like a little, it's another variant on Mullally's focus on anomalies, that he was so good at getting people to think outside of the narrow confines of their operation and consider things that they couldn't really explain. So that's all by way of validating and endorsing that kind of behavior.
Fantastic. Thanks, George. We have the last question. I know we have a little beyond our 3 p.m. mark. Mark is mentioning that individual factors are still easy to list, right? For example, the COVID-19, these are the potential outcomes and so on. How exactly do you deal with the interplay of so many factors? I mean, if you have 5 different factors and each one of them can have a different plausible outcome, how do you decide the interplay between all these factors?
So this is particularly challenging in a big multinational. So you have 2 levels, obviously, at the operating unit, the division, if you like. But let's look at Unilever, which I think is an exceptionally good organization at exercising foresight. They have a a lot of investments in pooling databases. They have invested in AI to extract insights from, say, their call-in lines. And so they look for patterns. So each business will have its own circumstances, but a big multi-divisional organization actually has an advantage because they can look for patterns across businesses and saying, we're seeing this kind of a phenomena in business A. How about in business B? Are you seeing this as well as a early warning sign? So I'll go back to the earlier observation about the retailer that Forever 21 that was not sensitive to the interest of their younger customers in sustainability and sustainable products. Now, had you been in a multi-division company, you would have seen that perhaps sooner and alerted every division to be thinking about how will, and in fact, we're going to have to be doing that very shortly because this issue will not go away. It's been subsumed in the corona chaos, but it will come roaring back, and the younger customers will be switching their focus much more towards sustainability. And there's going to be a lot of lessons that we learn from our response to the coronavirus that we can apply to climate change. But that's the kind of pattern I think that we can see, that if one business picks it up, another can learn from their response. And it's ultimately, and maybe a good sum up here, is it's about being prepared for whatever is coming over the horizon or around the corner.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, George. It was absolutely a privilege having you on this session of Reimagine Tomorrow.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the attendees for joining. It's really a privilege. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.